So good evening, everybody. Again, I'm AJ Aaronstein. I'm one of two deans of Beyond Barnard. This is day 3 of Social Sciences Grad School Week. Thanks for joining. Our topic for this evening is personal statement best practices. So if you are applying within the next 5 minutes for graduate school or thinking about how to plan to write a strong personal statement over the course of the next year or years, hopefully this presentation will give you some best practices, talk about some common mistakes that we've seen from Barnard students in Beyond Barnard advising appointments, and give you some concrete next steps to get started over the course of the next few weeks. I just mentioned this for those of you who may have just joined. I hope you'll also be here tomorrow for the alumni panel. It's taking place at 12 p.m. Eastern. I'll send around a link this afternoon to participants throughout the entirety of Social Sciences Grad School Week. I think it's really going to be a great conversation. And then Friday, we'll round out with our faculty panel. All of these events are part of Beyond Barnard's Summer Colloquium, which will continue for 3 more weeks, culminating in the summer wrap session. We're excited to have an alumni panel. We'll have some Barnard leaders talk about community and staying connected virtually throughout this summer and into the academic year. It's been really fun. Hopefully those of you who've attended have gotten a lot out of programming. I'll skip through this slide because we're basically halfway through the week, but all of this is to say the presentations for the Introduction to Social Sciences Grad School and the application process, the slides are now available. I shared them with all participants from the first couple of days, and I will send them this evening to everybody who attended the first 3 days so that you have any of the first 3 days so that you have all of the presentations in one spot. That will include today's presentation on personal statements, and already mentioned tomorrow's the alumni panel, Friday's the faculty panel. What to expect today? By the end of today, I think that you'll be able to go confidently and produce a first draft of a personal statement. And in doing so, oh my God, everybody. I just gave this whole presentation to my team about effective Zoom presentations, and then here I go forgetting to share my screen. There we go. Thanks for the heads up. Love you guys. It's funny to like do this without, you know, seeing people look confused. So when you're not on camera, I can't see you like, you know, I can scrunch. But anyway, there we go. So all you missed so far is, scoop my slides. The same slide I've been showing every day. This is what we're expecting this week. And here's what you can expect today, our workshop on personal statements. So like I said, hopefully you'll be able to go and confidently produce a first draft of your personal statement. And you'll be doing so while hopefully both integrating some best practices that we've identified at Beyond Barnard and some common mistakes in the graduate personal statement writing process. And I should say, just for personal context, my experience doing this is both as an advisor at Beyond Barnard and the University of Chicago, but it's also having read hundreds and hundreds of these kinds of statements from applicants as a reviewer of master's applications, and also as someone who worked really closely with doctoral applicants from master's programs. So hopefully I can give you some inside advice. Today may be a little bit more general just because I think that we're gonna focus on overall what personal statements are attempting to do in social sciences, and I would say also humanistic fields. So there's a lot of overlap here. But again, if you have specific questions about any disciplines, we can certainly talk about that. Okay, for those of you who've been engaged these past few days, you know that the theme of the week has basically been dogs. Today, to round out the last of my 3 presentations before we transition into panels, is dogs I've met around the world. So these are 2 Saint Bernards who, if you ever happen to be in the southeastern part of France in the Alps, the French Saint Bernard Heritage Museum is essentially just, they have like 25 Saint Bernards, and they're awesome and they're gigantic and they smell really bad. So dogs I've met around the world. But otherwise, the rest of today's agenda goes as follows. I want to start by laying out the overall goals of a personal statement for graduate school, then move to common mistakes before we then move to the kind of positive best practices. So overall structure for these documents, and then basically going from this overall structure to how to drill into each set of paragraphs, your academic work so far, where your work is going as a graduate student, and then what's typically called the fit paragraph, typically the last paragraph of the essay, although I'm going to say a lot about how you can integrate comments about your fitness to an institution throughout the entirety of your personal statement. As usual, we'll end with some next steps and questions. So let's kick it off with overall goals for the personal statement. This is a dog with a backwards Yankees hat on a skateboard that I met right in Union Square. Pretty dope. Okay, so here are the overall goals for a personal statement for graduate school in these fields, the social sciences. The number one thing is to think about the general personal statement prompt as a prompt that's asking you to communicate that you're a strong fit for graduate school. We talked a little bit about this yesterday when we thought about the overall process of applying to graduate school. Your prompt is not to say, I'm an interesting person, which may be the way that you read the prompt for your undergraduate essays. Instead, you want to be very clear that you're a strong intellectual and personal fit for graduate school. Bonus points for talking about strong fitness to the particular graduate program that you're about to enter. The personal statement will challenge you to situate your academic work within the field to which you're applying. So one of the things that I commonly see from Barnard students is, and alums for that matter, you want to emphasize the interdisciplinary background, the incredible breadth of your training at Barnard College. And clearly, everybody at Barnard gets a very broad-based education across disciplines. But for most PhD and master's programs where you're going to be asked to dig into a particular discipline, you want to figure out how to speak very specifically to the admissions committee, which is to say the faculty who are in the department to which you're applying. It's more beneficial to say, my economics coursework helps make me a better political scientist than it is to say, I'm equally a political scientist and an economist when applying to a PhD or master's program in either one of those fields. An exception may be a kind of general social sciences master's program where the goal may be to help you kind of focus in on one discipline. Then you can talk a little bit more about the breadth of your academic experiences, but you need to make it clear that one of your goals is to focus. A third goal for the personal statement is to show that you know how to propose a project in terminology and a format that is appropriate to the field to which you are applying. No one will ever hold you to the project that you propose in your personal statement in a particular part of the statement, which we'll talk about in a little bit when we get to the specific paragraphs. But it's important that you can show the committee that you understand what academic work at the graduate level looks like. That is, you need to at least perform that you can structure an academic argument in a way that would be recognizable to people in the subfield. It should trace your personal development along with intellectual work, or the way that I put it yesterday and the way that I think is really right is trace your personal development through the lens of your intellectual work. So this is not the space to talk about, since I was a child, I've been doing political science on my grandpa's knee. It is instead to talk about how your intellectual work has been routed through very specific projects, courses, seminar papers, essays, relationships to faculty, and independent scholarship that shows your promise as a graduate student. You want to be specific about the ways that you're a strong fit for the institution that you're applying to. I see this kind of slip away. And when the question came yesterday about how many schools should one apply to, and I think that applying to too many schools, very often I see folks start to drift away from the question of how are you a good fit for this particular institution. And I'll mention some ways that you can communicate that fit. And finally, you want to project how you would plan to use your graduate work in a future career. Too often I find folks just say, well, I want to teach, I want to be a professor, I want to write. Sure, but what more? What kinds of scholarly contributions are you hoping to make as a graduate from a doctoral program? What next steps in your career specifically will a master's program prepare you for? You need to be specific about how the intellectual work of the program could relate to other kinds of next steps, if possible. And again, no one's gonna say, well, we're taking your funding back unless you do exactly what you proposed in your personal statement in your graduate applications. What you need to show is that you have some sense of a reasonable track for a career that you might pursue after graduate school. So let's go on to some common mistakes that I've seen in advising throughout my time at Barnard. This dog is from a town in Argentina called El Calafate. Anybody been there? Thumbs up? No, maybe not. All right, it's all the way in the south. It's in Patagonia. I went there for my honeymoon with Gina just a couple of weeks ago. Before we went to the end of the world, and then we are now locked down in our 435 square foot apartment, y'all. But essentially, dogs are let to run wild. This is like our dream town. They're kind of taken care of collectively by everyone in the city. Anyway, they're napping and walking around and asking for pets and treats everywhere. This all looks hot, right? It's like a good nap in the sun. Okay, so some common mistakes. The very first one, and I've alluded to it a couple of times already, is an overemphasis on the personal side of personal statement. I've seen so many drafts, and it's totally natural for the first time you try to write one of things, starting with, like I said, I have been reading X since I was 3 years old, and that's how long my commitment to the social sciences has been. Or, yesterday I talked about I was hanging by my fingernails on a cliff over an ocean. That's not where you start with these personal statements, and it shouldn't be a kind of transformative life experience that doesn't have anything to do with your intellectual work. You want to focus on your personal development through the lens of your intellectual work. I see a lot of lack of clear organization, or instead leaning on a kind of chronology. So personal statements for graduate programs don't have to just be this, then this, then this, then this, then this. They definitely have a structure, but it's not necessarily one that proceeds in a linear chronological fashion, the same way a resume or CV would. And certainly I see a lot of first drafts of statements that make a lot of interesting claims, but don't necessarily add up to the central claim that you need to be offering, which is, again, I am a strong fit for graduate school. Graduate school is necessary for me at this juncture in my intellectual and professional development. General reasons for fit, I see this all the time. Lots of folks know that there should be a fit paragraph at the very end of their essay. If you don't know that, that's okay, we'll talk about it. But when I see fit paragraphs, very often they say, Harvard is a world-renowned university and one of the most distinguished in the universe, and it would be such an honor to go there. All of those things may be true, but it's not the kind of appropriate content for talking about the reasons why you are a particularly good fit for the institution. You want to talk about specific resources, archives, faculty members for sure, geographic affinities, and more. We'll talk about that in a second. In general, related to that, it would not be an honor to work with Professor X or Y or Z. Or that is to say, it might be, but the personal statement is not a place to praise the faculty of an institution without actually saying why their intellectual work is necessary for you to progress in your own work, and why you are the kind of candidate who can help faculty advance in their research as well. So it's not that it's such an honor to work with a particular faculty member as much as it is you have very clear reasons for why it would be an honor to do so, for why it would be the right fit for you to do so. The next one has to do with the kind of linear organization that I often see. It's essentially the personal statement masquerading as a CV, or the other way around, listing your experiences instead of creating a narrative. So one of the things you're doing with the personal statement is showcasing your strength as a writer. You should be using that old adage of show, don't tell. Instead of saying, I have strong experience in methodologies that align with the Department of Political Science at Boston University, you want to show how you have mobilized particular methodologies in your research that do already align with some of the methodologies that might be deployed by faculty in the departments where you're applying. So in other words, you want to make sure that instead it's like, I took this course and then this course and then this course. They have that with your transcript and your CV. Instead, you want to say, my interest in subfield A grew directly out of my experience in Sally Sallison's class on gender and politics. This built on previous experience in Robert Robertson's class on, introduction to sociological methods, right? So you want to create more of a real story about how your intellectual experiences hang together, rather than simply trying to impress the committee by saying, yeah, I've taken all of these important classes. The final thing is, this is not a mistake, this is best practice. I'll fix this in the slides after I send them around, so sorry. But I would say the common mistake is that you project a very broad sense of what you want to do with your graduate work after the program, as opposed to something a little bit more specific. So the example I used just a few moments ago was, I see myself as someone who will teach and produce scholarship. That is the most common thing that I see in first drafts, and that's fine. If you want to say that your graduate work is oriented towards being a producer of scholarship, that's a totally reasonable ambition to have. But you want to take it one step further. What subfield would you be interested in contributing to? What kinds of students are you interested in teaching? Are you interested in liberal arts college work? Are you interested in teaching at a big university? I think you should be reflecting a little bit more on what your career ambitions are, so that there's something credible to put into this paragraph that we're going to talk about your career trajectory. How do you get all of this, though, into a single statement? So I just said there's a lot of stuff that these statements are supposed to do, and it sounds really overwhelming to try to fit it all into one kind of square box. I would say that the best statements are typically around 750 to 1,000 words, sometimes 500 to 1,000 words. And so you can't accomplish everything, right? So I'm not saying that you need to do all of these things. What you need to do is pick what of the list of things a personal statement can do is most important to the programs that you're applying to. And this is Clifton. Clifton is a dog I met in LA. My wife's friend's dog, who met me in the backseat of their car on the way from LAX when we used to ride in planes, and just bit me immediately. It's kind of a jerk. We didn't get along all weekend, but very, very cute. Clifton is very, very cute. So when I say paragraph here, what I really kind of mean is mostly sentiment. Like these are kind of like sections. Instead of thinking them as AJ telling you need to write one paragraph on this, and then you need to write 2 paragraphs on this and this and this. What I'm really saying is this is the way you should potentially think about structuring the sentiments that you're conveying in your personal statement. So the very first paragraph, I think, is often far too long in first drafts that I see. I call it rhetorical throat clearing. You want to expend a bunch of sentences talking about all of the ways immediately that you are a qualified candidate for graduate school. I think the strongest first paragraphs get their work done really efficiently. Say something about your strongest reasons for fitting to graduate school, setting up a kind of main claim for the rest of the essay, and adding 1 or 2 kind of important pieces of situating biography or qualification. So I constantly read first drafts of personal statements that don't say the words Barnard College until like the 3rd paragraph. That's burying the lead. That's putting big headline news too far down the page. And the assumption is often that by the time a faculty member gets to my personal statement, they've already read my CV and my transcript. It's not good practice to assume that a faculty admissions committee will be reviewing your materials in a kind of chronology. So not every faculty member will review CV and transcript and then personal statement and then writing sample and then letters. Sometimes you start in the middle. You got a lot of these to review. You might start in one place for one candidate, another for another. You might read all of the personal statements first because that's the most important document in the applicant's materials. So what you want to do is make sure that the big news, I'm a 2020 graduate from Barnard College where I studied sociology and with a minor in political science. I wrote my thesis on X, Y, and Z. My trajectory leads me to graduate school because of this. To the program at Harvard University, I would bring a distinctive combination of experiences across research, fieldwork, and relationships with faculty developing peer-reviewed journal articles, okay? These kinds of sentiments, the kind of biggest news, the main claim, go in the first probably 3 to 4 sentence paragraph to set up your statement. The second and third sentiments that you want to go with, and I think that these actually can break down along paragraph lines. So I think the second paragraph is really where you talk about your most recent and most important intellectual experience. Typically for seniors applying to graduate programs, this is their thesis project. It can be a major seminar paper that was written under the direction of one of your faculty recommenders. It's a cornerstone of who you are as a person who is an academic, who is an intellectual right now. So notice we're starting from the most recent experience and most important, rather than saying the origin of my intellectual interests was 25 years ago when I first took an economics course in kindergarten. Instead, it's really starting with the most important. You're going to work backwards from there. When you're writing about your thesis, and we'll go into this a little bit more, you're going to talk a little bit about how your thesis project or how your cornerstone academic project fits into the discipline as it exists among faculty, among scholars now. Then you're going to move into important courses, important signposts on your intellectual journey. What are the markers that you passed on the way to this cornerstone experience? So your thesis is building upon previous experiences in this course, which connects to your research for X faculty member. You're building up the kind of foundation to how you got to where you currently are as a scholar. Paragraphs 4 and 5 will then shift the focus forward. So you start from the most recent, you work backwards to some of the most important experiences that you've had previously, and then with the picture of who you are right now as a scholar in mind, in the reader's mind, you kind of throw things forward. Now, as a graduate student, I plan to X. And here's where you want to articulate what your potential plan as a graduate student could be. Again, we'll go into more of these details in the next section of the presentation. Here is where you also have the opportunity to say where this work will take you in the longer run, to lay out some of the ideas for the kind of scholar that you might want to be even after your graduate program, regardless of whether it's a doctoral program or a master's program or something else in between. And the final kind of sentiments that you want to relay is your fit to the institution to which you're applying. So let's dig in here to these paragraphs individually. I'm going to lay out paragraphs 2 and paragraphs 3 at once. Alice, I'll get to your question for sure, and we'll talk about CVs versus resumes. I'm going to use them mainly interchangeably for the purposes of the conversation today, but there are substantial differences between CVs and resumes, and I'll lay those out. And we have a presentation and materials on CVs as well, so hang in there. Don't worry, we'll definitely hit that. So to get you started on paragraph 2, this is the paragraph immediately following your introductory paragraph. Paragraph 2 typically begins with something like this. My undergraduate research at Barnard focused on what? And here is where you kind of give your pithy summation of your focused interests at Barnard. It culminated in a thesis project or capstone paper or senior seminar, wherever your intellectual development at Barnard did culminate. And if there are alums on the call today too, you can talk about how maybe this intellectual work continued into your post-undergraduate life. Then you want to move to the claims that you make in this work. So very common here, I see like, in my thesis, I argued that. So your claim is the center of your kind of culminating academic experience. Or in my senior seminar, we focused on X and I produced a paper that really that claimed that something. Okay, you want to say in one sentence what the organizing claim, what the main claim, what the central argument of your capstone academic experience may have been. I think importantly for social scientists, laying out the methods that you used in the pursuit of that claim. So talking about what kind of ethnographic field work you did, talking about a fellowship that supported your ability to conduct quantitative research on some big data set, thinking about the ways that you analyze behavioral economics through the lens of an internship that placed you in a research lab. Methods are important for helping situate the audience within it helps them make them more confident that you understand what methodologies would be appropriate to the field that you're applying to. You can definitely talk about the faculty you worked with on the way. Here, I think it's really good to talk about how essentially setting expectations for what people will see in your letters of recommendation. So to make this argument, I drew on the research of which faculty. those are the faculty who may be writing your letters of recommendation. So it's good for the committee to see, okay, this is how Emily, I'm just gonna call out some names that I see, this is how Emily worked with Monica Miller, right? Or this is how Katie worked with Mignon Moore. So you wanna basically help the audience understand how the faculty who are writing for you fit into your narrative. Very importantly are stakes. Stakes answer the so what question. Why does your argument matter? And not just for like, kind of society generally, you want to kind of focus on how does your argument move the field of sociology or political science or psychology or economics or anthropology forward. Given what you understand about what people are talking about in the field through your work on journal articles, through your research, through your coursework that exposed you to certain professors in your field, through your conversations with faculty at Barnard, you know what current social scientists are saying. You should be trying to argue how your work at Barnard moved this conversation forward. What contribution are you making and why was it important? So in my kind of layout of how this goes on the page so far, we're thinking about the first page. By the start of paragraph 3, we're most of the way down the page. We haven't yet turned. So paragraph 3 or sentiment 3 is where you start talking about how your experience in other courses, in other research engagements, in other connections with faculty, in other fellowships that you pursued, added up to your key intellectual experiences. So here's where you talk about key courses that inflected your academic trajectory and again, bring up recommenders. And I think you get bonus points in this paragraph to tailor some of this narrative to the institution that you're applying to. So although there is going to be a fit paragraph at the end of your statement, if you can say, this project built upon longstanding interests in the intersection of X and Y, which I've analyzed through the work especially of Professor Martin, who happens to be on faculty at the University of Kansas Lawrence, where you're applying to a program. If you have used the work of other faculty at the institutions where you're applying in the context of your own argument, this is a great place to call that out. Because then you're not just reserving comments about faculty to the fit. You're not just leaving them to the end where you're saying, okay, in general, I'd love to work with this person. Instead, you're saying this person is already essential to the way that I conduct my work as a social scientist. And that essentially alludes to the fact that the program may be a really good fit for you. How are we doing so far? Emoticons are fine, you guys. Okay, I got one. Okay. Good, 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 good. All right, good. So questions in the chat, totally acceptable. How do you get started on this? I thought today it might be helpful to just kind of lay out a couple of reflective questions. So I'm saying a lot about like, do this, do this, do this, do this. But in general, what I'm really trying to help you get at is to ask yourself, what are the most important academic experiences that you've had over the course, especially of your time at Barnard, potentially before, probably not, and then potentially after? What are the key moments in your intellectual development on that journey to the most significant academic experience? Who are the people that made a difference in your intellectual life? Who are the people whose scholarship has really resonated with you? If you don't know the answer to this question, do not panic. It's something that I was not able to think about so clearly when I was first starting to figure out how to apply to graduate school. But one of the great things about the application process is that if you ask these questions, there turn out to be real answers. That paper that resonated with you a couple of years ago, whose author you never remembered the name of, you go back to and you find out who it was and you find out they're actually on faculty at the University of Michigan, which is exactly where you want to go. Doing this research and reflection now makes you a better candidate because it helps you tell your own story in the way that admissions committees need you to tell it. And then I think as well, what are academics saying now in your subfield? I can speak from my experience of sociology of n=1, which is like, this is my story, it may not be yours. But as an undergraduate, I didn't have an appreciation of what else was going on in the academic field where I was studying. I knew I wanted to make specific claims about texts that were interesting to me, but I didn't necessarily have a good feel for what other individuals were doing in the subfield that I was trying to write around. How do you get answers to these questions? I think one of the best ways is to talk to faculty, you trust, your advisors, your recommenders, and say, what else is going on in the field of political science of race? Who else is writing really interesting stuff right now? And then you want to figure out how your work could attempt to contribute to that conversation. I like to emphasize the language of contribution here rather than the language of disruption. There's a certain kind of scholar who wants to say how their scholarship has thrown, aside everything that came before it, and they're really messing things up. That is not probably the candidate that you want to portray yourself as when you're applying to these programs. You want to say, I'm the person who's making a kind of, I'm opening up the conversation to new possibilities. Instead of disrupting it, breaking it down, trying to, blow things up. You want to say you're the person who's going to add a piece of useful material to the conversation, I think. Disclaimer, as many times as I can say, none of this is dogma, none of this is written in stone, and you should cultivate a community of support in the ways that we've discussed this week to get more advice. But in general, I think my perspective is if you're throwing firebombs on the way into a program, it's not as productive as saying, I'm the kind of person who understands what's out there in the field, and I want to make a contribution to that field. All right, where is your work going? And one way of thinking about this, and this is a dog from a trip to the Dominican Republic up in Santiago, an amazingly beautiful city where a family friend lives half the year, and he actually also owns this crazy hacienda. So we went out there and his dog's running around and plantain trees. It's amazing. Okay, I just got distracted because it's so cute. Where is your work going? So the first thing you want to say here in terms of the directionality of your scholarship is that you're building on your foundation. So a good helper phrase to get you going here is, as a graduate student at whatever institution, I would plan to, or I plan to. I don't like hope here. Hope, there's no place for hope in your personal statement. You don't have to say that, oh, please let me in. It projects more confidence. I think more serious too, is to say I plan to do this. You can let me in or not, but this is what I would do if I were able to get in. There's a couple of different ways to think about how you can situate or look at your current work and project it forward. Are you interested in a similar topic, but exploring and implementing new methodologies to break open that topic? Alternatively, and kind of converse is, do you want to use similar methodologies? Do you want to use similar kind of regressive analysis to explore new topics, maybe a new time period, maybe a new population, maybe a new economic phenomenon, maybe a new psychological phenomenon, right? So these are kind of hacks, right? They're ways to get you going and thinking about this. What do you like about your work now is a question we've been asking all week. Take what you like and figure out how you want to make that new as a graduate student. Do you want to explore new areas? Do you want to use new methods to explore the same topic? In general, I think what I'm saying here is a foundation that sets the stage for your new directions and methods and topics. So you have this foundation from Barnard, you want to project that forward. And then I just want to talk about how does this work fit? So let's say, here's what your plans are generally as a graduate student, and here's how it fits into the institution to which you're applying. So this is another kind of bonus points, lightning round, extra credit section where you can integrate more tailored information or tailored perspectives to the institution. What do I mean? I mean, okay, I want to study, at Barnard, I studied the economic effects of delicious food on Brooklynites. I don't know. I like food and I live in Brooklyn. As a graduate student at University of Washington, Seattle, I would like to continue to explore the effects of delicious food on populations, but instead work on people from Queens, right? So same topic, different population. To do this work, I would draw on the scholarship of the University of Washington's Center for Food and Regional Studies, which is an essential contributor to the scholarship on foodiness and foodies. See what I'm trying to do here? I'm saying, here's my topic. Here's how I'd like to inflect that topic. And here's how our resource at the University of Washington is the perfect resource to help me get this scholarship done. It's a good place to weave in some of the research that you've done about an institution and show that you're serious about thinking about how you are a good match to the institution. This is not an invitation to name drop faculty. I cannot say that enough. So I see a lot of these sentiments that I'll say, okay, you want to think about how faculty could fit in, and then I'll get a draft back that says list of 5 faculty, just as a kind of I could work with Professor A, B, C, D, E, or Professor Zager. And what we're trying to do here is not necessarily say, okay, you guys are perfect because there's 5 of you and I know your names. You want it, to the extent possible, say Professor X's article on food and regionality was already seminal in the construction of my thesis, and maybe you've mentioned this in a previous paragraph. And as a graduate student, I would love to take his seminar on food in New York and foodie identity. Right? So now you can show that you've done some research on the seminars that faculty have taught, that you're excited to take that class, and referring to a faculty member that's there. These are the kind of ways that you can talk about what your plans look like as a graduate student. When it comes to your longer term goals, I think it's important to think about I think it's important to say a few things about how graduate preparation is necessary for whatever goal you're articulating. So here again, I want to give you a couple of more specific things that you can say about a career. Saying that you want to be a tenure track academic for a doctoral application is fine. It's something that will resonate with many faculty. But if you are interested in figuring out how to be a kind of scholar practitioner, if you're interested in bringing your social sciences research to bear on social and political challenges, it's a big one among Barnard students. They want their research to live in the world somehow, to inflect populations. I think this is a good place to say things like that, right? So you want to say not just, I want to teach. The common rejoinder to I want to teach is, great, go be a teacher. This is a graduate program in political science. We train researchers. And there's a whole other conversation that we can have about the ways that this is changing, the ways that teaching is becoming more central to the training of doctoral students and master's students. But I think that it's important, if you're saying, I want to teach, you might want to say something like, as a Barnard student, I had access to faculty in a liberal arts context, which drove my passion for the study of the social sciences. As a scholar and as a teacher, both my research and my instruction would be really valuable to me. And I hope to have influence over the lives, not just of future scholars, but focus on individuals at institutions like Barnard, women's colleges that serve diverse populations and that produce an inordinate number of individuals for graduate study. I don't know, I'm just kind of beatboxing here, but it's more specific, right? It's showing you something more tangible about the kind of scholar that you want to be. So in terms of me saying a lot of stuff and hopefully leaving you with something here, I think the questions that you need to ask yourself when you're jotting down ideas, and I really recommend journaling, just free writing, get away from this, just staring at a personal statement, blank screen. It'll just eat away your eyeballs, right? Get away from this and just think for a few hours about, what do you value about your academic work? Where could your values, where could that work take you, right? So you need to combine not just the research, but what you care about, how you want to be a person, not just a scholar, right? You don't want to be just another kind of labor slot, another, where being a professor or being a scholar is just a kind of job. Where do your intellectual commitments take you? And reflect on those kinds of things. What kind of impact do you want to have in the world, right? What is your real feeling about using scholarship to inflect public policy or sociological data or economic justice? What kind of impact do you want to have as a person who's trained in these disciplines? Okay, and finally, we're going to round it out with this fit paragraph. And this is dearly departed, rest in power, Milos, my buddy Mike's dog in Chicago. the great, great dog who is very lovable. He looks scary, but like was also like super kind. He's like the most chill. I'm blanking on the names of the name of this dog. What is this kind of dog called? Great, it's a German Shepherd, obviously. Sorry. Okay, so the fit paragraph. Here are the kinds of things you want to talk about in the fit paragraph. So first of all, you want to talk about the academic resources in specific. You may have already mentioned faculty in the paragraph about what your plans would be as a graduate student. If so, great, you can talk about additional faculty here. Here's where you can talk about specific libraries, archives, data labs. So I think like Barnard would be a great example. If I was trying to be a graduate student at Barnard, I would say the Empirical Reasoning Center is a fantastic resource for understanding how to integrate qualitative and quantitative sociological methodologies, right? And so I'd be speaking specifically about a resource that's at Barnard. Or I might want to say, the zine archive is incredibly important for my study of marginalized voices in the production of literary culture, right? So you want to say something very specific to the institution in terms of what kinds of holdings they have, or what kinds of centers they have, research centers, like the Center for Digital Humanities. I'm using all Barnard resources now. So if you're applying to graduate school at Barnard, if that were possible, you might say the Center for Engaged Pedagogy is a fantastic resource to help young scholars understand how to be scholar teachers, but referring very specifically to these resources and not saying Barnard is a world-renowned resource or a world-renowned institution for X. Other institutional resources, I think you can talk about. So as much as I'm going to contradict myself a little bit here, but I think with a point. You want to position yourself as a person with a disciplinary home if you're applying to a disciplinary program. If you are applying to a political science program, it's good to position yourself very seriously within the discipline of political science, regardless of how much econ you took, right? You're going to draw from econ, but make sure it's clear how that fits into the practice of political science. However, lots of institutions have cross-disciplinary graduate reading groups. They have seminars that meet weekly. As a master's student, you might have the opportunity to be in a cohort of individuals that cross the social sciences. And I think referring to the capacity to build community, to collaborate across disciplines, this is where you can talk about how your liberal arts training across disciplines makes you competent in having dialogue with individuals across the social sciences and even farther afield than that. You may want to mention an institution-specific resources with respect to career advising. I know you're always going to come to Beyond Barnard, but you may also want to say the University of Chicago and UChicago Grad together set students up to explore a diversity of careers. And as a graduate student, I would be interested in taking advantage of the resources there to build up my identity as not only a scholar, but a professional. Things like that. The last section here, other affinities, you may want to call out geography. So especially for doctoral programs, institutions want to know that you will stay there and be happy there. Some of the best graduate programs in the world are in places that are very different from New York City. And without kind of calling out any particular kind of institution, I think it's important to say that if you like region X and institution Y happens to be in that region, say I'm from there. It would be a terrific opportunity to return to my my home state and contribute to the field of psychology in the context of an institution that has always meant a lot to the community where I grew up. Those kinds of things do resonate, right? You don't have to be only an intellectual robot to write an effective personal statement. You can speak to these like real reasons why an institution has a special connection to you. I think that any experiences with the department or program to which you're applying already, conversations that you've had with students, connections that you've made with faculty in the conduct of your thesis research, let's say, that can definitely go in a fit paragraph. And this is another reason why it can be helpful to connect with students. We talked yesterday about how part of the application process can be outreach to current graduate students. Here you can definitely say things like, in my previous conversations with students in the program in dog cognition at University of Kentucky, Louisville, I've been so impressed with the caliber of the conversations and the seriousness with which students think about the relationship between animals and people, right? So like your capacity to say something specific about your previous interactions with students in the program can actually then be something that you add to the fit paragraph. Again, the watchword is specificity, right? The better you can be at being specific about how you connect to the institution, the better. That makes it more challenging to do the work necessary to write these statements. It makes it more challenging to churn these things out as a kind of plug and chug Mad Libs type of essay. So I would always advocate, as I said yesterday to the group that joined, it's more advantageous to maybe thin your list of graduate institutions that you're applying to in order to make each statement packet of application materials more tailored to that institution. So I think altogether, you want to be asking yourself here, what are your key factors in happiness? You know, if you're going to be a graduate student, you're either going to be spending a short amount of time as a master's candidate, but potentially investing a large amount of treasure, or you're going to be a doctoral student and you're going to be investing money, but also a great deal of time. You want to be in a place where you're happy. You want to call out things about graduate cohorts that look productive. You want to say that you're, maybe it matters a great deal to you to be in the mountain time zone, close to skiing, or it means a lot that the faculty are representative of the kind of diversity that you would want reflected in academia. If that's the case with these institutions, those are definitely things that you should be spelling out in what you want at a place, but also out of people who will definitely be your intellectual colleagues. So this is a dog that I met in a winery in Portugal. He was always really mad at me for taking pictures, but he's a dog, so I just kept taking pictures. He was so cute, covered in flies. I think the key theme of these dogs, by the way, is mostly they just left alone. Like a lot of the dogs in this presentation, I realize are just kind of like left and like they turn out fine. But anyway, I think in all, next steps, you want to connect with Beyond Barnard throughout the month of August if you can, and try to get your a draft of your personal statement done by September 1st. I want to be very clear about how we approach advising on personal statements in our shop, and our dear friends at the Writing Center are really great at this too. We are not going to be able to perfectly argue how your project will fit within the subfield. I am not a sociologist. I could not be farther from a sociologist. However, I can help you get your personal statement to a place where a faculty member who knows much more about the discipline can then really drill into that statement and say, this is positioned wrong for the University of Kentucky. You know, I know Sally Sallyson there, and this is what she would want to see and how you're positioning your project. What I would hope to do as your advisor on this is make it so your first conversations with your faculty members are efficient, that you're not wasting time with the faculty members saying, with a personal statement that begins, since I was 5, I've been doing economics, right? That you've checked the boxes, that you're covering the kind of general thematic moves that you need to cover. And for that reason, I think that, you know, getting your statement edited or looked at before you get out to faculty, potentially by the beginning of the academic year, would be beneficial. But I think overall, you know, in terms of understanding institutional fit, I think it's important to get moving on doing your research on programs, approaching Barnard alumni who are at those programs, going to tomorrow's talk, panel discussion of alumni, and getting to understand the faculty landscape. So I'd say, get writing for sure, and spit something out. You're gonna have to do more than one iteration to get this right, almost assuredly. But I think moreover, also understanding the landscape of research and institutions, getting started on research is also a really productive activity at this point. So I'm going to stop there. I want to be attentive to some questions that have come in. So first from Katie, to everyone, so you can read it, but I'll read it aloud. Hey AJ, come for the grad school content, got a bunch of dogs. Got it. That's what we're hoping for, right? Just, there's no reason this can't be at least a little fun. I mean, I'm sweating like crazy here in my 100-degree apartment. Okay, where could relevant job experience fit into your into the recommended letter structure? And is it considered appropriate and effective to name specific alumni that I've spoken to from the program, assuming those alums give permission? Great questions. And I think the first question is relevant job experience can go into that experiences that contributed to your overall intellectual development. So like you have your capstone intellectual experience that built on multiple years, not only of coursework, but of related professional experience in X and Y and Z, right? So that's where I would fit it. Like if you have really good clinical research experience, if you're a psychologist, if you have really good archival internship experience and you're a historian, I think that can definitely go just below the kind of cornerstone academic experience that you want to talk about. If you graduate from college and then go and do something wildly different, so I'm just going to use sociology, n=1, me again. I worked in advertising sales for 2 years after college. I know, hard to believe, but I didn't talk about that at all in my personal statement. And the fact of the matter is faculty are not going to ask you, well, why didn't you mention anything about your ad sales experience? It's because it doesn't fit into my narrative as a scholar, right? And so you can comfortably leave that out in a way that if you were applying to a job, you would probably have to mention many of the things that you did, even if they weren't directly and obviously related to the thing you're applying to. Question number 2 here. Yes, it is acceptable to name an alum that you've talked to. It may not make a world of difference in the grand scheme of things, but I think it does demonstrate that you cared enough to reach out to someone, and definitely getting the permission of the person you talk to is important. I mentioned this yesterday kind of in passing, but I think it's important to kind of underline here because it relates to the question. More and more graduate students have say in a kind of collective decision-making process about forming graduate cohorts. So it can be, you can actually be talking to someone who can influence faculty when you're having these conversations. Another question just came in, graduate programs that aren't focused on research. So like psych master's programs that are more clinical focused. I'm gonna go back to Alice's question about CVs for sure. So I think that basically even when you're applying to psych master's programs that are more clinically focused, you're gonna have a combination of researchers and pure clinicians in the mix of admissions committees. So you definitely want to talk about yourself as an academic. You're going to school, right? You're not going to, you're not learning on the job. You're gonna be doing a practicum in these kinds of clinical programs, but you're also going to be in classes. So you don't want to just run to this practical experience. I do think, again, that if you have good applicable professional experiences that relate to the coursework, that weaving them into, and sometimes I see this with psychology folks, you've done good clinical work that actually contributes to your thesis experience. Totally fine to mention that as related to the cornerstone experience that you kind of anchor and that you may use as your writing sample. So I think, I don't want to kind of jog around the question. I think it can be really valuable for certain kinds of programs that, let's say, have practicum experiences already in them to talk about your practical experience. And this is true even if you don't have any research experience. So if you're entering a clinical program and you have tons and tons of clinical on the ground with client experience, talking about that in relationship to how you did your academic work can be just as impactful as talking about research experience. So don't worry about not having enough experience to get into graduate school. You can always talk if you're self-conscious about that, but in general, if you have the clinical stuff, it can be workable. No worries. Okay, so on CVs, just to kind of round things out and make sure that I get to Alice's question a little bit more fully, the kind of very quick and incomplete answer to the difference between CVs and resumes is resumes are one page and they make arguments about your fitness to a particular opportunity through curatorial choices. You don't say everything that you did. You say the most important things about what you did do for the audience that is going to be reading the resume. So it's short, it's typically one page, definitely at a, if you're a senior at Barnard, if you're 5 years out as a Barnard alumna, your resume should be one page, almost without question. A CV, I said resume, your resume should be one page, almost without question. A CV is oriented around what academic audiences value most. So very typically you'll hear resume is one page, CV is multiple pages. True, CV can go multiple pages. Some CVs are still one page. That's totally fine, especially at this point in your academic development. A CV does not have a page limit. It lists most of the So it lists basically all of the academic experiences that you think are valuable and relevant to the thing that you're applying to. And it emphasizes what is interesting to academic audiences. So a great example of this. Tons of folks have internships at lots of really interesting nonprofits, for-profits, whatever, on a resume. And if you're applying to a job, that internship may be your #1 qualification. For a graduate program, unless that internship is of the kind that we just talked about, a clinical internship, a kind of clinical program, your work experience at Bronx Defenders may have nothing to do with the scholarship that you produced about legal aid in New York. And in that case, your internship would be far down. You'd emphasize your education, talk about coursework, talk about research experiences, talk about publications and presentations, talk about awards and honors. I don't even have an awards of honor and honors section of my resume, but I do on my CV. So you're talking about things that orient your experience specifically towards academics. What I'll do this evening is I'll share with you all a mock CV that you can kind of play around with, and also our CV guide from Beyond Barnard. And you can kind of start to get a look and feel of the differences between these two documents. We're not doing a specific CV program as part of this week on graduate programs, on graduate school, just because we don't have enough time. But we do regularly hold sessions on CVs. So always happy to have you at one of those programs or talk about CVs and advising. Do tons of them all the time. Any last questions? That's 7 seconds of silence, which at the end of a program to me means have a nice evening, everybody. Please join us tomorrow. We would love to have you for the alumni panel. I think it's really going to be a good discussion. Stay safe, stay well. Send my regards to your families, your pets, your plants. Have a nice evening, everybody. Thanks to all of you for coming.